Okay.
Manager, you go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ready to jump into our second budget workshop. We're going to take a deeper dive today into revenues and expenditures. We'll talk a little bit about both operating and capital assumptions. Hopefully, we're on the right track that we've been listening over the course of the last several months to what your priorities are. And we'll run through those. And if you have comments, we definitely like to hear those when we get to that portion of the presentation. So let's go ahead and jump forward, Megan, if we could, to slide number 5. Matt will walk us through the numbers.
All right, thank you, Mr. Manager. Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's our pleasure to be here this afternoon to facilitate budget workshop number 2. We've got a number of slides here we'll go through in greater detail and expand on what we talked about at budget workshop number 1, which is really focused on priorities and progress. So we'll start in the general fund, which for the benefit of council and the audience, the general fund is the home to the city's core operations: police, fire, public works, parks and rec, excuse me. It's the largest single fund and makes up about 52% of the city's total budget. Council may recall for several years, we used a bucket graphic to explain, where revenues came from and what they could be used for. So the general fund and the slides we're going to go through now really represent the first bucket, which is general purpose revenues and expenditures that have the broadest legal horizon. So, clicker's not clicking. Let's see. All right, we just have to do it. Oh, next slide.
There you go. Whoop, there was there.
All right, so the first slide we're starting on is a general fund revenue comparison. The columns are labeled A, B, and C to facilitate, as I discuss some of these variance calculations, you can reference back and forth what I'm talking about. So this includes our current year budgeted revenues, column A. Column B is our current year forecasted revenue, and column C is our preliminary FY23 budget. I'll note that all of the revenue numbers, go back please. All the revenue numbers that we're going to share today exclude our NIB bond financing because it's an extraordinary item that causes significant fluctuations in these numbers. Also does not include our second tranche of ARPA funding, which at this moment is currently status unknown. I will tell council we've got some promising communication from Treasury this week asking us to make sure all of our accounts are set up so that when they're ready to send the money out, they can. So that at least tells us somebody is working on a what if the money does come to us, we'll be in good shape. So current year revenues are projected to come in about $7 million over budget, which is a favorable balance of about 6.5%. So if you look at the bottom of the chart, you see B minus A gives you the variance between budget and forecast. The primary driver on the revenue variance is licenses and permits, which includes local business license, insurance tax, and other items. Insurance taxes revenues are not received until late May and early June and are difficult to forecast. So our FY22 budget was $11.7 million, which is a very conservative estimate, seeing as our prior year FY21 actual was about $17.2 million, and our average for the past 3 years before that was about $14.8 million. So because of that difficulty forecasting, we under budgeted. Our year-end projection is about $14.5 million, so that's making up a large part of the projected variance. On business licenses, as you know, this is the first budget where we had the statewide business license standardization and the impact of that. So budgeted revenues, column A, was really conservative because we budgeted for limited growth compared to FY20, which was the basis of the law was we couldn't generate a windfall in a new rate structure. We're still early in the renewal process and the trends are favorable, and I'll discuss those on a later slide. Property tax revenues make up about half of the general fund. They were estimated conservatively for the current year due to a countywide reassessment, which occurred in last fall. That saw the city's assessable property values increase significantly, which led to a reduction in our tax rate of 3.9 mils, or about 4.5%. As such, our current year projections are just slightly above budget, and FY23's projected revenue shows an estimated 3.8% growth, which is below our 5-year trend of 6.2%. So again, conservative on the revenue estimate going forward. Overall, the FY23 revenue budget is about 10% higher than FY22 due to our conservative estimates, but really only about 3.3% higher than the money we actually expect to bring in this year. So while it looks like a big increase year over year in the budget, if you look at the budget compared to what we're actually collecting, it's a very small increase. Next slide, please.
Matt, can I ask
Yes.
a question on that slide? Okay. So what you're saying, if you look at the column where it says budget forecast variance and the percentage, are you telling me or us that is that I don't know if this is the right term. Is that surplus? Is that extra? Is that money? Is that more money that came in than what we had forecasted?
Yes, so if you're looking at kind of midway where you have B minus A, that will contribute to the year-end surplus.
The $6.9 million.
Yes. And we'll get to that in a few slides.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So property tax is our most significant single source of general fund revenue. Thanks, Mike. And so this slide shows a comparison of the city's tax rates with the other municipalities in Greenville County. You can see, two key things here. One, we have been and continue to be in the middle of the pack where we have, we're number 3 out of 6. We have some jurisdictions that are higher and several that are lower. You can also see the impact of the reassessment this year and the decline of our total tax rate. And you can see that that was pretty consistent throughout the county, some more sharp, some less sharp, but that shows a consistent pattern of keeping us in the middle of the pack in terms of tax rate.
And in addition, most residents of Greenville live in the unincorporated areas, and in some of the largest unincorporated areas like West Greenville, Parker District, they pay considerably higher taxes than the city of Greenville.
Yes, sir. So we have some information we're going to share with you all at another time in an annexation workshop that shows you the differential between everyone to the west of us in terms of special purpose districts and the city and the favorability of the city's tax rate in those jurisdictions. Going forward on property taxes, we're showing total property tax collections in the general fund and the former TIF funds over the last 10 years. Tax revenues have increased by 68.5% since 2014, while the value of each mill on tax rate has increased by 76%, meaning that not only has the city added more value to the tax rolls, the existing property within the city has gotten more valuable at the same time. The current value of each mill on the tax rate is about $671,000, so represented on the far right of the chart. On business licenses, which is our second most significant source of general fund revenue, as you all know, we're in the midst of our first business license renewal under the new statewide standardization act. So the numbers on the slide are current as of last week. I have a few that I'm going to update with data from today. So this is for businesses that will have renewed as of this morning, April 25th. Greenville businesses overall have had a good year in 2021, increasing gross revenues by almost $965 million. So you can see the slide says 893. So in the last week, the businesses that have renewed have considered to show or continued to show a favorable result. That's about a 14.5% increase compared to the revenues from these businesses in calendar year 2020. And 72% of businesses that have renewed so far have reported higher revenues. We're at about 4,912 renewals. So that's about 55% through. And so businesses have until the end of next week to postmark their business license renewal to be renewal at par before we get into delinquencies. So just a few stats here. The business license fees, again, this is information current as of last week. Collected so far this year, we're about 18.8% higher than last year. The effective tax rate went from 0.135, so 0.135 to 0.141%. And so, on every $1,000, you're talking about a handful of cents on revenue. About 26% of businesses that have renewed so far are paying lower fees this year, even if their revenues increase. So the impact of our new rate structure is showing the projected favorable variance that we showed you all when we built it. So this data is also before the implementation of the rebates that council included in the new business license ordinance. Those will be processed at the end of this month. And so you will see that the actual fees paid by the businesses will continue to show an even more favorable result as we process those.
Matt, what percent of these licenses are new businesses as opposed to?
This is 100% renewing businesses.
Okay.
So there's a separate set of data for new businesses, but this is just comparing apples to apples, folks who had a business license last year and got one this year. These charts show 10 years of trend data on our major general fund revenue sources. The blue on the graph represents actual revenues, and the orange lines are the year-to-year trends. On property taxes, the big spikes in 2018 and 2019 were due primarily to growth in the West End and Verde areas. And while growth has continued, it's been muted somewhat by the tax rate rollback in 2022. So while revenues have continued to increase, that rate of growth slowed because we reduced our tax rate last year. On business licenses, the trends show a spike in 2019, which was calendar year 2018 revenues, a small decrease in 2020, which was 2019 revenues, and stable growth through 2021 and 22, with a conservative estimate for FY23 due to the current incomplete renewal process. Insurance taxes, as mentioned previously, are unpredictable, but have been trending positively. 2021 was a uniquely high year, resulting in the trend spike last year. Permit fees, which are not themselves a significant revenue source, vary greatly year to year. Large spikes in these revenues usually signal future increases in other revenues. And interestingly, even though we are experiencing historically high permitting activity, as Shannon shared with you a few weeks ago, our revenues are fairly flat, which implies that though we're having an increase in the number of projects, we are decreasing in the size and value of those projects compared to prior years. So moving now from revenues to expenses, our current year expenses are trending about 2.6% below budget, which is partially influenced by an expected expense that has not yet materialized. So this is something that will be coming to you all before the end of the year. We're already planning for it to hit, but it hasn't been approved by council yet. So that's baked into the numbers. Controlling for that, current year expenses are trending about 5.5% below budget, which is consistent with FY21. FY23 budget expenses are shown 3.9% below budget, but when controlled for CIP fluctuations are actually about 5.5% higher, consistent with inflationary pressures. So let me unwind that a little bit. The line that says CIP, where you see in column A and column B, 21 and 24 million, those are significant one-time expenses that occurred this year. That being primarily the purchase of the floor building for the public safety campus. So those don't recur in column C next year. And so you have a $10 million variance that's throwing these numbers off. And so what I'm telling you is if you take that out and you just look at operating expense to operating expense, we're about 5.5% higher next year than the current year, which is again driven by inflationary pressures, proposed enhancements in parks, recs, and tourism, and an increase in our debt service due to the issuance of the NIB and public safety campus debt.
Hey, Matt, notwithstanding
Yes.
the inflationary pressures, I mean, each of the past several years I can recall, we've always had an increase in our budget expenditures. Can you give some perspective over the past couple of years what that single digit increase has been like?
So this 5.5% would put us right in range. So the range has been 4 to 8% over the last few years in operation increases. And again, this year it's heavily influenced by fuel and personnel costs.
So I guess relatively speaking, even though there's a 5% increase in budget expenditures, which doesn't surprise me in the least, relatively speaking, it's actually lower than in previous years when inflationary pressures weren't as high as they are in 2022.
So that's a fair conclusion.
Matt, can I ask a question here?
Yes, sir.
And I'm sorry for the questions. The budget forecast variance, does the $3.2 million represent we spent less than what we had forecasted?
It means we're spending less than what we are budgeted to spend. So our forecast for the year end shows that we're going to spend that much less than our budget.
It's a good thing.
Yes, sir.
Now, is that then added on to surplus at the end of?
Yes. So a combination of that favorable revenue number and the favorable expense number, add those together, and that's our year end surplus.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. Thank you.
That's what we're here for. You're not here just to listen to me. So moving forward to our general fund operating assumptions. So this list includes some of the noteworthy drivers of the FY23 budget. First on the list is our GTA funding. So projected funding for next year is just shy of 1.5 million, which is consistent.
Can you go back to that last time? Oh, okay. Something else came.
I hadn't got to that one yet.
Okay,
That was a
guys.
figment of your imagination. That never happened.
Slides.
So 1.5 million for GTA, which is consistent with our level of funding over the past few years. Capital equipment, which is our rolling stock and our IT technology. This is increasing about 600,000 from the current year due to higher equipment costs and greater needs for our technology investments. And if you look down at the operating budget, we've got this sort of broken down by focus area. So under legal, we're recommended funding for an additional assistant city attorney position and upgraded FOIA software to keep up with the demand in FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act. In the planning department, funding is proposed for 2 additional inspectors, additional money for temporary personnel to handle peak workloads, citywide demolition needs, and a city detect code enforcement software. Under communications, we're recommending funding for a refresh of the city website, and these should all sound familiar to you all from our presentation a few weeks ago. Under the fire department, their budget request includes an additional fire inspector position, funding for the summer training camp, AED replacements, and upgrades to station security. Under police department, they're proposed to receive additional funding for recruitment efforts, supplies, and hardware upgrades. And those costs will be partially offset by our law enforcement fund. And so not all of these expenses will be in the general fund. Under Parks, Recs, and Tourism, they're budgeted for 13 additional full-time employees, 2 for cemetery maintenance, 2 for a parks trash crew, 2 for downtown area maintenance, 5 for maintenance, and 2 for Unity Park programming. An additional 4 part-time employees are included to serve during peak weekend hours in our high-use parks. These increased investments will be partially offset by HTAX funds.
Do we know how much offset?
So about 2/3 of that will be offset by HTAX because they're serving primarily tourism-related parks.
Okay, and are these positions, are they also going to help deal with the staff issues we've had with like festivals and the like?
I have to defer to Angie on that, but these are really parks maintenance staff, not event staff.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Matt, how will this impact you mentioned, you mentioned what they're assigned to, but I didn't hear you mention Falls Park.
So the downtown area maintenance crew includes Falls Park in their area.
But they've got to cover the park and all the sidewalks and all the plants. It's not just Falls Park.
Correct.
So, and then that was 2 additional?
Yes. Under Public Works, they're proposed to receive an additional transportation manager position that will oversee the design and build out of the traffic management center and the city's traffic management investments that are part of the NIP, as well as sign fabrication equipment and increased security measures for our traffic engineering facilities. In the IT department, they're recommended for an additional GIS position to support citywide mapping and data needs, as well as increased funding to maintain software and hardware for the city's overall business needs. The total recommended general fund enhancements total about $3 million, with about 2.3 of that in recurring costs, being staff versus one-time capital replacements. Other enhancements not covered elsewhere in the presentation include an additional occupational health nurse for employee health, 3 temporary or contract project managers to assist with delivery of the NIB and other infrastructure projects, an additional paratransit dispatcher for GreenLink. There are a total of about 21 positions recommended for inclusion in the budget next year, all in.
Matt, how about municipal court?
We don't currently have any recommended enhancements. They are going to take 1 full-time position and split it into 2 to provide weekend coverage for certain needs. But that is something that we are going to look at again between now and the next update.
Okay.
And is that included in the miscellaneous other enhancements? That one position split into two?
That is not, because it's effectively cost neutral, so it's not on here as a dollar
Okay.
increase.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. None of us heard that, John. No.
We've had some conversations about some additional support for municipal court that will likely reflect at the next budget presentation.
So moving on from our operating budget to our CIP, the proposed general fund CIP for next year is about 11.2 million. This project shows the charts in order of funding magnitude, as well as any decreases or increases from the prior year. The general fund share of affordable housing funding is increased by $1 million to $2 million. The total projected FY23 investment in affordable housing is $4 million. So $2 million coming from the general fund, $2 million coming from elsewhere. Commercial corridors, which was increased from 500,000 to 1.5 million last year, is further increased to 2 million for FY23 for public-private partnership investments in our neighborhood commercial areas. The ED fund set aside for public-private partnership investments primarily in the downtown area is held constant at 1.5 million. Fire station improvements, which nearly doubled in FY22, increases slightly. These funds are accrued from the 2014 millage rate increase and finance new station construction, as well as major renovations to existing stations. In-step funding is held steady at $1 million, and this funding will be used to support the NIB and Section 108 sidewalk projects. For FY23, there will be a total of about $12.5 million in sidewalk projects in the pipeline, which is over a decade of normal investment. ED initiatives funding is held steady at $850,000. There's a typo here, so the negative 100 in the last column should be a 0. This includes funding for ED-specific marketing, support for our innovation and entrepreneurship partners, and investments in our GLDC recruitment efforts.
Is this where Next is funded from?
Yes.
And if you don't mind, was it $250,000 last year?
Yes.
Just the portion to Next?
250, yes, ma'am. Land acquisition fund is held steady from last year. Traffic calming funding is increased by $150,000. This was a new program in FY21 and is augmented by additional money in the traffic engineering operating budget. Police body camera contract is a recurring investment. All our officers are currently equipped, and this simply represents the annual contract cost for camera support and data management. The Viola Area ED Fund, which you all heard a lot about today at lunch, is increased due to higher tax collections in the former Viola TIF area. Bike ped infrastructure funding.
All right, wait a minute, since we heard about it at lunch
Yes,
today, Matt. All right, so the budget you're saying is going to be 333, an increase of 40 over the
Yes.
previous year?
Yes.
And that 333 can be spent in Viola?
That's the primary intent. It's up to council to ultimately decide. It's not a legal restraint, it's a policy restraint.
Okay.
And Matt, will that be taken partly from the balance in the current TIF
No,
in Viola Street?
no, this is money that flows into the general fund. Since 2016, any money that flows into the general fund that is attributable to property in that area has been held aside in this separate project.
What will we be doing at this totally separate conversation, but what will we be doing with that balance? I think the balance is 1.4, 1.2.
It's about
for the
right.
TIF.
We'll be coming to you all with some recommendations on
Okay.
investment of that fund.
And keep in mind that it's called Viola TIF. The geographic area that it used to be was basically Stone Avenue,
Yeah.
East Stone, big area. And one project in that area, we've done a number of projects in, of course, in Viola Street, but also in the surrounding area. But that empty property, we have the green site, as we call it, Hollis Highway, and we're still trying to find a good buyer for that site or a good development for that site. And we always intended that there'd be some infrastructure money available to do something on that site.
But you're saying you're allocating 333 in the upcoming budget from that 1.2 or whatever it was?
No, that
No,
333
this is separate.
adds to that 1.2 that's already there.
Okay.
Yeah, that we heard today.
Yeah, for those of us who were at lunch today,
Heard very
we'd love to hear
negative
what you
complaints
propose.
From Viola Street about things that were not being done in that particular area. knew that fund was there, et cetera, so.
Yeah, funds are definitely there.
Yeah,
you
so
know.
I'm just saying, some of the things that they have asked for repeatedly
Yeah.
have not been done. But our staff has been working for us to get them to the point that we would say yes to them so they can get it done.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, hint, hint, yes.
Get ready.
To them, so we
There's
can
a-
get it done, because.
I know this had come up before, but there's always been,
It
for,
was as
for a
if-
neighborhood like that to do the things they need to do, that should be just a good, if the money's there, I would
Yeah.
think. And still beyond that, there's funding for other things like
Yeah.
undergrounding and other projects.
So it's been a bandwidth issue up till now?
Sounds more like to me it has.
Well, and the thing is, it was very, very negative that we have just abandoned them and left them held hostage to this, that, and the other. And I had to assure her, trust me, it takes a while for money to be allocated, And I said, it takes the entire group of city council to appropriate funds, but we have not abandoned you. The city manager explained that, no, we've been discussing that and we will not abandon you. So,
Where the entire neighborhood is a creature of the city. We created it.
yeah.
Roads, the
Yes.
park, everything else in there. It's all city created.
So
Sorry to
those
get you
of
off topic
you who were
there.
there.
History gets forgotten.
Yeah. So those of you who were there, as you see, I told you, we will not abandon you.
So the next project on the list is bike ped infrastructure, which is held constant at the current year's 250. And it was a new initiative this year. So we're rolling into year 2 of that.
Okay, Matt,
That-
so we did 250 last year and that was kind of an unusual appropriation. So now we're appropriating another 250 in the upcoming year to
Yes, so-
continue that process.
It was included last year as a recommended recurring. line
Okay,
item.
okay, great, thanks.
But that's the, set us, just like we have the in-step for sidewalks, we have a program for the trail system. That's this 250 though.
Yeah, so this is one of the investments throughout the city's budget in trail and greenways
Yeah,
expansion.
and it's separate from this, we
Yes.
had the infrastructure bond and other projects.
Yes, sir.
But for example, this year, that's what we're using to pay Stan Tech, right? The quarter.
Yes, so we're using the money from this to pay for the citywide
Okay,
pedestrian safety study. That was the current year.
and,
In the new year, you'll have a new 250,000 that can be programmed for projects.
okay,
Oh.
and what paid for the restriping,
On Augusta,
the diet?
that was paid for by part of the NIB funds.
Okay.
Downtown facade improvements is increased by $100,000 due to the popularity of the current year's pilot program. So that'll be new funding available for projects next year.
And what bucket does that come out of?
This is all general fund that
Okay.
we're talking about right now. Sidewalk ADA improvements is decreased by 100,000 due to the large number of sidewalk projects in progress that will address most of the significant issues. Tree fund seed money is decreased as the tree ordinance has started generating sufficient revenue to sustain tree planting efforts. And so they have a balance of about $300,000 that's been generated by our enforcement activities.
A balance of $300,000
Yes.
in the Brazington Fund. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Let me add to that.
Seriously, I had no idea.
We're going to be partnering with Tree Upstate and others because of the climate change and the problem. So, since some of us are climate change certified, came and said, we have money. We'd like to help y'all do trees now. Folks, I was not authorized, but anybody said, we have money. Trust me, I found the right person to tell them, we can bring them over here, we will take it. I just want you to know that this is going to be increased by some other hundreds of thousands of dollars as of the meeting was yesterday.
To Councilmember
Friday.
Fleming's point, she, as well as Councilmember Stahl and myself are certified,
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember DeWorke, and that training is available to you at any time.
I look
And you
forward
get
to
a
it.
pin.
It's a great
I get a
commitment.
bus.
It's homework, a lot of it.
I'd like to get a
And guess what? It's a great commitment. You learn an awful lot.
Mm-hmm.
I bet.
So Matt, the facade is just an incremental investment. There's no change to the scope of the program in terms of the boundaries included within this.
No, so this is a separate program. So under the commercial corridors umbrella, we've always had a facade improvement program for our commercial corridor areas. And so that program will continue to be funded as part of the $2 million. This 150 that was allocated the current year, proposed to be increased to 250 for next year,
It's just downtown.
is just for the downtown area.
Okay.
Is a downtown facade improvement not considered an investment that helps tourism? promotes tourism?
Maybe.
In the
It's gonna be
downtown?
Very case dependent.
I think the answer would be maybe. Yes, I agree. We have talked about that.
But it's also, to me, it's a commitment to the people who have invested time and money downtown.
Absolutely. I
Those
just think it's
visits,
a different
That's what
bucket.
it's more of to me.
I mean,
If you have a restaurant, seriously, that's even more obviously, probably qualifies if you wanted to. It's just, we probably can do it either way, in other words.
So to quote our current and former and every other city attorney, it depends.
It depends. A restaurant would be probably a better
Okay.
choice than a.
now, wait a minute,
Hotel.
Main Street trees.
So that's the last one on the list. Main Street trees, this was a legacy project that was funded for years.
We've had this forever.
And so when we rolled the TIFs off last year, we just moved this from the TIFs to the
Yeah.
general fund. And it provides consistent funding source for keeping up with the tree canopy downtown.
Seems like the downtown tree canopy is also tourism related.
Could be.
That would be, I'd
I'm just
be
saying,
very confident, I'd be very confident it would be, yes.
anytime we can allocate something to a fund that has shackles on it, for lack of a better term, we should be doing that. Because when we encumber our general fund, we're doing it unnecessarily if it can be covered under H-tax funds that has strict boundaries.
Continue to review and as we go forward for whatever's eligible.
Of course, it fluctuates more too, though. You have to be, now we went through COVID and we've seen with recession, this is more sensitive. So it's kind of
I mean, I
how
understand
much
we're
beyond
tight.
what we bond, the big stuff, but the smaller stuff, it's more, sometimes we have to hold those in reserve. Of course, the general fund, is fluctuates also.
But H-tax is tight from our council retreat discussion. Correct.
So we've talked about general fund revenues, expenses, capital investments, and that rolls us into the closing slides on the general fund, which is fund balance. So you all currently have a policy in effect.
Let me make one editorial comment. I just, one thing about these projects, for the affordable housing, the investment in commercial quarters, the sidewalk in-step program, the traffic calming, first of all, most cities have no such programs in their budgets. We are almost unique. Investments in neighborhoods and corridors. But the other big thing about this, it certainly strikes me, is we look at these amazing revenue numbers of the city of Greenville, no doubt the strongest city budget in South Carolina. Whereas it's the return on investment that we make in these projects. I mean, the sidewalk program creates value later on. So do all these programs. They create value and create the return on investment, which gives us the big revenue. So to me, this is very sort of foundational in terms of how we create the budget we have.
So your current fund balance policy
Right, John.
requires a set aside of 20% of expenditures. There is an update on your all's docket tonight for consideration on an update on this policy to affirm the 20% requirement and then address what happens to any funding above that level. So this schedule shows our current projected year-end fund balance. So this is for the current year. So if you go back to last June, when we had our audit, we had about just under $50 million of fund balance. That includes all fund balance, assigned, committed, unassigned. If you look in the middle column, you see our budget for this year had revenues of 104 million, expenditures of 126 million, which was projected to drop our balance from 50 to just under 28. If you look at the far right column, you can see our forecasted revenues have gone from 104 to 111, expenses down from 126 to 122, meaning that our fund balance now projected at the year end is 38.1 million. So Councilmember Dworkin, to your questions, this is where all of that's sort of working out on the revenue and expense side. If you take that and apply our 20% fund balance reserve, that means we're going to put $24.25 million aside and say that's committed, don't touch that. That leaves us at year end of this year with about a $13.9 million unassigned fund balance. As we've talked, go ahead.
Matt, but the 24 million, we're not actually, it's not 24 million out of this budget. There's already a balance in there. We're just going to have to add X amount of dollars to get us to 24 million. Is that right?
Yes. So all this money exists in idle cash, and it's just which accounting bucket we're putting it into.
Okay.
It's in the rainy day bucket.
It's like it sits in savings.
Yeah, no, I get that. I just, my point is, it's not like we're taking, basically, whatever, we might have 20 million in there right now, and we're just adding to it. Is that?
Yes, just incrementally.
Okay.
Yes. So the projected FY22 performance, better than expected by about $10 million due to revenues projected around 7 million higher and expenses projected around 3.5 million lower. And again, these do not include the ARPA funds. So that, between now and our next meeting, we should have an update on that, and that will influence these numbers.
May I just add, I love this slide for two reasons. It's a positive slide, but over the years, there have been previous attempts, in my view, to illustrate this and help council as a body follow these important kind of sum totals, right? The general fund balance, the unassigned balance. In my opinion, I think this very nicely and concisely frames it up. So keep it handy and keep it positive.
That's what
So
I told you. People
this-
should understand what you're putting down. We can follow the dollars.
Thank you. So this is for the current year end. Now I'm going to forward to next year. And so that's 38.1 million. This is the same number that you can see at the projected 632.22 balance, about middle of the screen on the right. So that flows over to our starting balance for next year. We have our revenues and expenses. So our current budget is set up to use about $6.5 million of fund balance. And I'll remind you all that we have about an $11.2 million CIP, meaning that every dollar of that fund balance use is for capital expenditures. We're not using our savings to pay for operations. We're paying for one-time expenses. So given those, our preliminary fund balance, fast forward to this time next year, is estimated at 31.6 million. We apply that 20% reserve, and that gives us an unassigned fund balance of around 7.4 million. So this is where our current policy stops. This is where we would stop discussion and say, okay, we'll move on now. You have $7.5 million of unassigned fund balance. So,
And typically we've used that to cover maybe overruns on capital projects. It's just been this money that sat there.
they've been there for unexpected or extraordinary expenses, and they're available for mid-year appropriation.
Did we appropriate any mid-year from it?
Yes, this year we used about $10 million of unassigned fund balance for the floor property purchase.
Okay.
So if you go back in our history over the last few years, we've done things like make extraordinary investments in affordable housing. We did a mid-year update to provide funding for the LMO rewrite outside of budget. Going back several years, there was the money that went to GTA for affordable housing, the original version of the council district dividend. So all those have come out of unassigned fund balance. So fast forward to if you all adopt the proposed amendment this evening, this is what will happen with the fund balance. So year end 38.1 million, we're going to use 6.5 for next year's budget, leaves us a balance of 7.4 million. So the policy recommendation is to take 80% of anything above our required reserve and put it in a capital project reserve. This is a new concept for Greenville. This is giving us the future ability to take on large projects without debt issuance or relying on pay-go funding.
Okay.
So that takes about $6 million of that chunk. And then the policy recommendation is to take the remaining 20% up to a total of $1 million and provide it as council district dividend. This is for small capital projects that are specific to the council districts that may not compete in the global CIP because they're small dollar amount. That leaves you another $483,000 of unassigned fund balance, which just gets added to our reserve. And so our projected reserve at the end of the current year is about 20.1%.
And that's 20.1% of budgeted expenditure.
Budget expenses for next year.
Which is a large part why we're AAA credit bond rated by
Right.
3 agencies.
So that 80%, that number, 6 million, is that what we referred to in previous years as our CIP? Or, how did we describe this before?
So before, that money would have just remained in our unassigned fund balance, and it was just kind of sat
Floating out there.
Yeah, and this goes back, Councilman Brazenton's been asking for this for several years of, hey guys, what happens after we get to 20? Then what's next? And so that was identified as, a policy update that we could make of say, okay, we want to keep 20. That's comfortable. That keeps us in great credit ratings. But then as we talked to you all at the retreat, what comes next? What do you want to do with it? Council dividend was something that you all expressed an interest in. Capital project reserve allows us the ability to save up for future projects and fund the council dividend.
But traditionally, we've been using that excess for unforeseen mid-year corrections, like the LMO, like the floor building. So now we're saying we're putting in a capital project reserve, but I'm sure we'll continue to use it for the unforeseen
Yeah,
mid-year
if there's something that
draw.
comes up during the year, council can appropriate it from the capital project reserve.
I mean, it's true. We have tended for a long time to put it towards CIP capital projects, as you said, so we don't spend current revenues. So this formalizes the process that we've had in place for some time, but we never made it a matter of policy. So I think it's a good idea.
I mean, I think it's a
Constructive.
great policy, and I think the key to it being successful in the long term is to prioritize those capital projects as a council and stick to that priority. In other words, there's always going to be, like if you're looking at your household and you say, well, we need a new furnace, we need a new kitchen, we need a new car, we need to put our kids through college. Those are big capital expenses for a family, and they're going to prioritize them and stick to those priorities. We as a council build a list of capital wants, needs, prioritize them and stick to that, because there's always going to be a shiny new penny, right? I mean, in theory, the floor building, which I fully advocated for, threw myself on a sword to help those people in municipal court that were swishing around from a sewage overrun. That was a good project. It was also a shiny new penny that had been talked about in past years, but really hadn't bubbled to the surface. It's that prioritization and sticking to it that to me is essential when you're talking about these big projects.
We have some things that we have to do, like a police department and a city court, and then otherwise at CIP, we've done a good job over the years of putting money into capital projects that generate a great return on the investment later on. And that's, again, I think that's what really is distinctive about our budgets for many, many years. It's return on investment.
So Matt, that 80% is a new addition, right? Something to build upon in future years. I don't know if we would ever elect to do this or not, but you have 5 or 6 years of $5 to $6 million accumulated of this type. You're up to 30 to 40,000, $30 to $40 million in the capital project reserve. In municipal finance, would it ever be advisable for an entity to take a number like that for a purpose like this, $40 million for a capital project reserve? And endow would not be the right word, I don't think, but somehow, well, I guess it'd be the same as like a bond issuance, but somehow tap into the principle of it to in perpetuity, have it generate $3 to $4 million. You follow that?
Yeah,
I mean, our capital improvement right now, it's $11 million for this year, which is a 10% increase from last year. How can we turn this into, a in perpetuity 20% increase over our capital project funding?
So really the only way to get there is to keep having budget results that are generating surplus revenues that then fall to the capital project reserve. This is, because this is the first time it's being allocated, this is probably an extraordinary number because more often than not, year end, you're not going to add, 7, 8 million each year to the fund balance. We try to keep it, more balanced than that. But to your question going forward, these funds will be invested. And so there will be interest earnings off that money. And so that just gets put right back into the capital project reserve. And so it grows over time. So
we could, in theory, I mean, this gets beyond today's conversation, but we could establish as an aspirational or visionary goal, drive this thing to $100 million project reserve, 15 years or something like that.
Then I think the question would be, for what purpose? What would you like to use it for? And that's, right now we may not have an answer. You all are working on prioritizing your capital projects for us to consider. And so when we come back to you all at next session, this number may be smaller because we may have said, okay, things have bubbled up to the surface. We need to spend some of this money now rather than sticking it in a reserve for future projects. We've got some projects on the list.
And we have to look at it in terms of this is going to be a policy statement, that projection, which actually changes some of the numbers when we change policy.
Mm-hmm. And I just caution that while it sounds great to build up that type of number of fund, every dollar that we put into that program and we wait and wait and wait, that keeps us from doing other things that we could do, like affordable housing, parks, sidewalks along the way. So I'm certainly, supportive of this. But like I say, going forward, I'd like to make sure that we're not cutting off our noses to spite our faces on this.
Yeah, I think setting it aside is a good policy, but maybe I differ on what is a capital project. I don't think by definition a capital project has a return on investment. In other words, a community center has an intangible return on investment. You're talking about serving people. A tourism, or, you know what I'm saying? So some things generate revenue, some things don't. Sidewalks don't generate revenue, but if they're connectivity downtown, maybe you could tie that. But, expenditure on this should not, by definition, have to offer a good return on investment in dollars. It could be community-wise. It could be, quite frankly, for the people who already live and work here.
And, to echo what the mayor said, this is really it's sort of what we're doing now. It just formalizes the practice and answers the question of what do we do with the money we have above our required reserve? We've said, okay, we're going to set it aside. I would say the goal is not to maximize this number because it's to put it into projects, but it's to not cost us as much, in a year or 2 years when we go to do the project. So the last slide under the general funds is the ED fund. I referenced this in the CIP. This used to be our former TIF. And so over the last few years, as we wound down the TIFs, these monies have been transferred to the general fund. And we set aside a certain portion of those for investment in our ED fund. So our balance at the end of last year was about 8.4 million. We added $1.5 million during the year, but we had $4.5 million of appropriations for the cultural corridor, for the county square housing appropriation, for a loan appropriation through GLDC for business recruitment. So if you take those out, we have an ending balance of the current year of 5.4 million. We're going to add another 1.5 next year. So we have an available balance of around $7 million in the ED fund, again, to facilitate public-private partnerships and new investment in primarily the downtown area.
When did our last TIF expire?
September.
And which one was that?
It was both the
Both
CBD
Viola
and the West End.
Okay.
Viola expired in 2016.
So that 1.5 million, the second to last line, Matt, that's what's coming in this year we're living in.
Yes.
So we should end with almost 7 million in that.
Yes, ma'am.
And this should not be confused with the economic development initiatives that we have.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is the longstanding public-private partnership fund, if you will, and we do have goals and guidelines for using that money, including looking at return on investment, that kind of thing. But this is that essential downtown directed fund, though it can be spent outside of downtown as long as it's a qualified project economic development.
So that's the end of the general operating fund. And so now we're going to talk about some of our special revenue funds. So going back to the bucket reference earlier, this really represents the second bucket, revenues specifically required by law to be spent on certain purposes. So the purposes of these monies are primarily for tourism related expenses, as opposed to general fund, which is legally available to any legal source. So hospitality tax is our largest source of tourism related revenues. It's derived from a 2% tax on prepared meals and beverages in the city. So we have a projected fund balance at the end of the current year of around 4.8 million. And that's largely going to be driven by better than expected collections. So our revenue budget for this year was around 11 million. I think we're going to get around 14.5 million. So that's largely what's driving the fund balance. If you look forward to next year, revenue estimates about 15.6 million and expenses of around 17 million, leaving about a $2.1 million unassigned fund balance. I'll note these revenue estimates are well above pre-COVID levels, showing the excellent health of our hospitality industry. So pre-COVID, we would average 6-7% growth a year, but in terms of total dollar amount for next year, it'll be a historic high water mark in terms of hospitality tax revenues.
Matt,
So we did the B, not the L, correct?
We did a big V in hospitality. It went right back up.
Matt, how do was trying to look at this in terms of what generates it. But, we know when people come here for a weekend visit, they're eating out. There's a tax when they eat out, and that's contributing to this. They might buy tickets at the well or somewhere. There's probably a tax that goes towards this.
Hotel tax.
No, it's a tax. So because this is specifically H tax, not A tax,
Yes,
right?
yes, ma'am.
In grocery stores, when I go to the grocery store and I buy anything prepared, am I paying H tax?
If you're buying a public sub, yes.
Okay.
If you're buying a cold sub off the shelf, no. It follows the same grocery store sales tax applications as the statewide sales tax.
So it's a fair statement that people like outside of eating out downtown, which I love to do, but I'm paying H tax in other ways in my life just living here, right?
Yes, so this is not a tourism tax purely on the basis of generation. It's a tourism tax because the legislature limits expenses on tourism-related purposes. That's why we lump it in the tourism bucket.
Matt, what is remind me the debt service reserve? What is it and how do we arrive at the 1.2 million when we look at a snapshot like this?
So the 1.2 million, I'll show in detail on the next slide, but it's a combination of a $500,000 just plug for us to say we want to keep a minimum of 500,000 cash on hand in hospitality. And then our outstanding debt has a reserve that's a specific percentage amount that amounts to around 750,000 for this year. And so that's dictated partially by conservatism on our part, partially just by the bond covenants.
Okay.
So going through the hospitality tax planned expenses, support for Lake Coniston Nature Park. This is an agreement the city entered into several years ago. So this is continued support for that area. Discretionary support for Visit Greenville SC, 560,000. We'll talk about Visit Greenville several times in the tourism section. This one differs from the others is that this is purely discretionary. There's no legal requirement for council to provide these funds. You all do it just because you decide to do so.
Matt, do all municipalities pay into Visit Greenville SC? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that question.
So,
Can we
I
make
know-
that a follow-up?
I know the county
John?
does.
I know the
virtue of
county
having
does. I'm
a
asking about the
state
other
tax.
municipalities.
But that's a good
If
question.
someone could check on that.
Is that the Visit Greenville, $560,000? Is that an increase? Did you say that was an increase?
That's a flat dollar amount that's been consistent for several years.
Okay. And
So
then-
we've traditionally been about 1/3 of the funds for Visit Greenville's budget. Best I can remember looking at
And-
it, the city
and
of Greenville.
And do we get a report from Visit Greenville as to what they do?
Yes.
Yes.
When do we get that?
They publish an annual report. I'm not sure of the timing.
I understand the annual report. Does council get a report based on?
We
what-
get it at the board meeting and they
We-
meet monthly. Quarterly.
Uh,
Does,
There-
does council get a report on?
Their CEO has not on a rigid schedule, but periodically come and present. So to answer your question, on occasion.
Okay, I'd like to formalize that. I'd like to get a report to council as to. I'm sure they've got some people that could put that together for us.
Well, they've got a sitting CEO.
Yes.
They've got an interim.
If they do a monthly report to the board, is that sufficient?
Yeah, I was just looking, we appropriate $560,000
That's
discretion.
above and beyond.
That's right, discretionary, above and beyond what is already appropriated by law. And I think it's pretty reasonable to just get something. Yeah,
Well, just to take that.
I don't need an update. I was just wondering what they do with the money. That's all.
I would say I agree. I think that's smart and prudent. And to take it one step further, just while Paul's thinking about it, it's a different organizational relationship, right? That of us and Visit Greenville SC than Greenville Zoo. But I would suggest that anytime there's a regular allocation of funding, subsidy, or generosity for the operational health of something, that we get into practice of once a year hearing those entities. And I'm glad to see that we've started doing that about the zoo, seeing it there.
That's appropriate.
Debt service in the H-tax funds are around 3 million next year. That's a decrease of about 1.3 million from the retirement of some older bonds. And so that number is declining. This is offset by an increased transfer to the general fund as reimbursement for tourism related expenses. including special events management, enhanced policing downtown at tourism facilities, and parks maintenance in our high-traffic parks. So debt service going down, general fund transfer going up, and they more or less net out year over year. Proposed HTAC CIP includes funding for the Verde Swamp Rabbit Trail underpass, a portion of the city share of the Unity Park Honor Tower, and continued funding for greenways and trails, SRT pedestrian bridge maintenance, and public safety cameras.
I thought the underpass was $1 million.
I think 1.8 plus contingency.
Glenn, I knew it was too good to be true.
I heard 1.2 to start.
Probably didn't include design fees.
It's still a better idea than a mammoth, crazy bridge, I think.
The,
So are we going to circle back to talk about, well, we'll circle back and talk about those at the end, once you get there.
the last operating assumptions in hospitality tax, continued subsidy for the Greenville Convention Center of about 600,000. It assumes we're going to make some mid-year adjustments. We're not in a position at this point to fully project their subsidy need for next year. And then the Greenville Zoo subsidy at 300,000 is down about 150,000 from the current year. The zoo is performing very well. And as I flip to the next slide, one of the things we'll talk about is a continued program gradual decrease in HTAX support for the zoo as they become more self-sufficient. So this is this slide format you'll see repeated. So we've talked about next year, but this really gives council a look out into our future planning on hospitality tax to tell you, okay, there's things that are impacting us beyond this year. What does that look like in the out years? And so I'll call your attention to three things that you'll see on all of this style of slide. In the top right, you see our assumed revenue growth. So on hospitality tax, we're assuming 5% annual growth. This is well below our pre-COVID average. And so while we're at historic highs, our projections are conservative going forward. The red box in the middle, the revenue surplus or deficit, this shows for any given year revenues minus expenses. So when it's a negative number, like FY23, it means we're consuming fund balance. When it's a positive number, it means we're adding to fund balance. And then on the bottom, the red box shows the ending fund balance, any reserve requirement we have in the fund, and then the unassigned fund balance. So if you look at FY23 for hospitality tax, you see 15.6 million in revenues, 17 million in expenses. That means we're going to consume about $1.5 million of fund balance. We started the year with around 4.9 million. And so we're going to end the year at about 3.4 million. To that, we're going to reserve 500,000 plus the debt service reserve, leaving the unassigned fund balance of around 2 million. And I'll pause there on HTAX. Y'all have any questions?
What was the bulk of what we consumed this year?
So for the current year, FY21-22, you see the transfers out of 12.6 million. That's where the bulk of the money goes, and that's a combination of CIP and general fund support.
The 12.9 million.
Yes.
Okay, and the bulk of that was for what?
So more than half of that was for general fund support, for parks, enhanced policing, special events management, things like that.
As long as they were tourism-related parks.
Yes.
So it had to have been Unity Park, Falls Park, maybe some
Cancer survivors,
cancer survivors.
parts of Cleveland.
One
So-
thing that around the state, again, looking at other cities and how they do things, as well as the county, one thing that really has always been distinctive about our hospitality budget is it's very oriented to big projects. And we have lots of money to spend on special things that come and go, but we also focus on, meaningful big projects that really move the needle and create more hospitality tax later on. And a lot of cities and counties have fallen in the trap of just throwing the money into 10, 15 different directions, and they literally have nothing to show for it at the end of 10 years.
So one abnormal item I do want to point out here, and I do want to stress this is a planning number for planning purposes only. You'll see in FY24, there's a new bond number of around 35 million. The reason that's in there is to show council that we have capacity to take on a large scale project and continue to have HTAX capacity for other projects.
What
So-
year is that?
So this is a placeholder for the downtown conference center.
Is that when we pay off Falls Park?
Those bonds will be paid off this year,
Okay.
FY22.
So that 35 million is a placeholder for a presumed downtown conference center.
And again, planning purposes only, this is just to show if we want to do a big project like that, here's what our excess capacity looks like.
And just because when we first got in this discussion, we have bonds for, like the bonds for Falls Park expire, is it next year or this?
This year.
This year, yeah, the bond for Falls Park expires, so we're sort of stepping in its shoes, basically, if we choose to do that.
So what's the current amount of the fund?
Sorry.
How much money do we have in that fund right as of today?
On the hospitality tax fund, we have about $4 million around $3.5 million unassigned fund balance that can be spent right now.
Okay. And we're expecting that to go, just so I'm clear on what these numbers represent,
We're expecting that to go down about $1.5 million next year.
next year. And then we're expected to start rebounding the year after that.
Yes.
Okay.
Matt, what is our, and I know it's on here, but I can't see it through all these numbers. So we borrowed 38 million. We did an H-tax bond of 38 million, maybe 36 million for Unity Park.
Yes.
So where does, and that was in 2020.
2020, March of 2020.
And so that payment shows where?
It's under, so in this presentation, it shows under capital expenditures, about midway through expenditures. That includes our debt service number.
Okay.
So I cited.
for,
So you see
4.3, yeah,
4.3,
4.3
3.0.
this year. Okay. And then it,
3.0.
and then it, I'm looking at 4.325, right?
Yes.
And then it jumps back up in FY 24, 25.
And
Is
that's
that
to show
presuming
the impact of that big project in FY 24.
if that goes through? Okay, gotcha.
So moving on to local A tax. So this is another area where we've built up a fund balance because of conservative revenue estimates. And so Councilmember Stahl made reference to the V and L shape recovery that we all talked about during our FY 21 budget adoption. I'd say the A tax was much more of an L shaped. It took a lot longer to catch, but just like hospitality tax, we're looking at well above pre-COVID average for our revenues this year and next year. This is our second largest tourism revenue source. It's a 3% tax on overnight accommodations. This money has some legally prescribed uses. About 25% goes straight to Visit Greenville SC as a pass-through. And the remaining 75% is pledged to cover debt on the Bon Secours Wellness Arena. That debt retires in 2027. As time has passed and that debt has been paid down and our A-tax revenues have grown, we get to keep the surplus. And so we use that for tourism-related projects. So you can see in the projected progression on local A-tax from the current year's ending balance of around 2.4 million, revenues of about 4.8, which would again be a high water mark for us. Expenses of 6.5 million, resulting in an ending balance of about 260,000. And I'll show you on the next slide why that's not a troubling number for me. So for the uses, you can see we pay Visit Greenville about $1 million out of that based on revenues. Our arena debt will be just over $1 million. And so we'll get a general fund transfer for collection costs and some reimbursement for tourism related expenses. And then the final year of our current operating contracts for support for the Bon Secours Wellness Arena. For the CIP, $3.5 million is proposed for the remainder of the city share of the Unity Park Honor Tower project.
Is that art in public, and I see 75,000 for art in public places. That's a net change of nothing from previous years, correct?
Correct. That has been a consistent amount for many years.
How do we maintain our public art? Who pays for that?
So we have a small budget for public art maintenance, and this money is to provide seed funds to the Art Public Places Committee to get matching dollars. And so they use this for small operating expenses. The cleaning and maintenance of art is handled through our operating budget. So looking forward in our local A-tax forecast, same format as before, assuming 4% annual growth, again, below our pre-COVID average. You can see in the middle where while FY23 shows about a $1.7 million consumption of fund balance, that's going to bounce right back and accelerate next year and beyond. And so while our available fund balance for FY23 is low, unassigned only about 260,000, you can see next year it bounces right back up to around 2 million and then goes from there. So this is where, because of our proposed uses, we have a constraint, but this is a fund that does not have a lot of pre-programmed CIP. So the money that we've accumulated didn't really have another set purpose at this point in time. State aid tax. This is a 2% tax on overnight accommodations. It's collected by the state and reserved for use as recommended by the aid tax advisory committee. That committee heard their FY23 requests about 2 weeks ago and will meet this week to make their recommendations, which will be presented to you all at your next work session by committee chair, Joe Heineman. So out of these funds, the legally prescribed use is 5% plus 25,000 goes to the general fund. So that's almost 172,000. The next 30% goes to Visit Greenville SC. So that's about 880,000 for next year.
Okay,
And-
well, I'm going to sit down on that one. So we had 560 discretionary, plus about $1 million in the last slide, plus 880. So we're at 2.3 total ballpark.
Correct.
Okay.
And then that 1.95 million at the bottom, that goes to the the state ATAX committee for recommendations. And historically, Visit Greenville gets a significant chunk of that as well. And so when Joe presents to you all 2 weeks from now, you'll see how that allocation breaks down for next year.
So when the ATAX committee presents, it's coming out of that 1.9 number?
So yeah, for the,
It's
yeah,
not local? It's not local?
nope, it's all state ATAX.
Do we get the recommendations ahead of time so we can review, or do they make the recommendations? And do we vote on them at the same time?
They are making recommendations based on their committee.
Right, no, I
Vetting.
understand that, but when they make the recommendations at council, is that when we vote?
So
City
you
manager.
won't actually take a vote on those. So what will happen is next week, the committee will make their recommendations. We'll provide them to the city manager's office. He can share with you all. And then the week after that, the committee chair will be here to explain their rationale. And council can provide feedback to the manager on, yes, no, we want to see some changes.
Lobby the people.
But it's not official vote.
So going forward in the state ATAX fund, 4% annual growth assumption. You can see the revenue surplus deficit line is fairly balanced, and that's by design. And so in this fund, we try to maximize the money that goes to the state ATAX committee for recommendations, because that's funding events, festivals, and things like that in the community. And so there's no sense in us holding back this money. It can't be spent on anything else other than recommendations from the ATAX committee.
Right.
And so this budget is designed to increase their money that they have to allocate. We're almost back to pre-COVID levels. So pre-COVID, they had about $2 million a year to allocate. That was cut to under $1 million in FY20. It was about 1.5 million, FY21, about 1.5 million in the current year. So they're getting back up to pre-COVID levels. This projection is designed to get them back to about around 2.25 million by the end of the forecast period.
I want to make recommendations that they improve their diversity appropriations, because at times, years before, we would always ask to be sure, and we need to continue to do that, because I've had some calls from some musicians, artists, et cetera, and we need to do let's just ask them to do a better job of being inclusive.
So moving on to enterprise funds, this is our third bucket.
Man, I just want to comment.
Yes, sir.
The first accommodation tax in particular, you get a little explanation, but about some funding accommodations tax that was previously tied up with the arena district, and we're kind of betwixt and between. And just want to thank you for digging out that kind of fact, because that meant millions of dollars for us that otherwise we may not have noticed. Of course, it's your job to notice those kind of things, but thank you for catching. That's a good one. That's new money, not appropriated. We didn't expect it, but it's a good one to know about and to follow. We may be hearing from the county later on about that in terms of some wishes they may have, but that's a good one to have brought to our attention.
Thank you, sir. Enterprise funds is our third bucket of funds. So first bucket, general purpose. Second bucket, restricted for tourism-related purposes. And third bucket is for our business type activities. And the expenses of these funds are restricted primarily to the purpose for which the revenue was generated. So sewer funds get spent on sewer projects, stormwater funds spent on stormwater projects, et cetera. So we'll start with the stormwater fund, maybe.
Why would that the millage increase on the fire don't spend more than 30 seconds explaining this, but when a millage increase was put in for fire station improvements, why would that not have been an enterprise fund? In other words, revenue generated based on that.
It's
millage
not a
stays-
legally restricted purpose. It's council policy driven. So when we did the tax increase, council said, whatever we don't need for the original purpose, which was the financing of the Verde Fire Station, whatever we don't need for that, we want to continue to set aside for the benefit of our fire stations. And so that's a policy determination, not a legal restriction. That's
Okay.
the distinction.
Yep, so fund new fire stations.
So in the Stormwater Fund, we're presenting a relatively balanced budget with continued investments at the current level of operations, debt service, general fund support, and capital equipment replacements. In the Stormwater CIP, there's 800,000 for Stormwater 2.0 projects, money for continued asset management and modeling, and 250,000 for engineering related to the Stone Lake Dam.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Is there
Thank you.
Now that, thanks
what's
to
the
Paul Dow on
percentage of
that.
increase the annual, is
So
it
that's-
still annually
that's a-
increased?
Excellent transition, because my next slide is, we are presenting a stormwater budget that shows no planned rate adjustment.
Oh, my goodness. That's,
God, it's
that's shock and amazement. That's great. Okay, I'm just gonna,
Okay,
So we're
this is the news at 11.
that's headline news.
We are recommending that stormwater rates be frozen at the current level while we evaluate the current funding model for stormwater funds.
Okay,
Um,
why we didn't tell those people that at the neighborhood meeting? I'm just saying, this is a wonderful thing for, particularly for neighbors who are elderly and who've had some struggles in their life. This is great.
Don't get too excited about that.
Okay, I know then you'll come back and raise it again, but that's all right.
Matt, I should apologize. This collection comes on our property tax bill?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so annually it's on our property tax.
Yes.
Yes, it's there.
So,
Certainly comes up in annexation issues because it's certainly one of the bigger things that we have to overcome, and we usually do, but we have to overcome that. And
yes.
ironically, though, that these are some of the most popular projects too. These are the ones people really, really get excited about because stormwater is a serious matter, and they're always
But-
happy when we cure things. But it's a
But also to recognize the average person's how they see it. They don't care about what makes up all those numbers. I don't think what they care about is what is my tax bill? And we certainly feel like their tax bill, because of reassessment, is going up.
Yes, so between the general fund property taxes and the stormwater, the city-controlled components of their tax bill, there will be no rate increases this year.
But the bottom
The-
line,
Yes. So even with the current rate structure, so this forecast is designed to show that even if we freeze rates while we evaluate a different model of funding, we can absorb our current operating and capital needs going forward in the stormwater fund. So in the wastewater fund, the wastewater fund's in very healthy financial shape, and it leads to a recommended increase in capital investments for sewer rehab projects. So all the way down to the bottom, you see a $5 million number for wastewater system rehab. Given year, that's normally about a $3 million number. So we're in a place now that we can spend down more cash and feel comfortable in the wastewater fund. So we are proposing a 3.5% rate increase in
Matt, real quick,
Yes.
this is where some of the federal money could come in. Obviously not reflected in this budget, but there's some opportunities beyond.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have sufficient cash to be able to offer local matches and be competitive for a lot of sewer projects. So we're projecting a 3.5% rate increase. I'll remind council that our practice in sewer is to increase by CPI each year. Given that the specific CPI metric that we use is around 7%, we're recommending half of that as an increase because a 7% increase really isn't called for this year in the wastewater fund. And going forward, we've got built in 2.5% CPI increases. And so that number may fluctuate, and we may come back to you with a different policy recommendation on sewer funds.
Good.
This puts the sewer fund in a relatively balanced to slight negative net income position. Another recommended change is for the past 5 years, we've done small annual debt issuances for sewer around $2.5 million. We're recommending we go to less frequent and larger debt issuances for sewer projects. So we just put $7.5 million into the sewer system last month. So depending on the speed of those projects, we may push the FY24 debt out another year. But in total, this forecast calls for $25 million in sewer CIP over the forecast period and reserves sufficient capacity for expansion as needed. In the parking fund is in a healthy position to make some large investments this year, which includes our annual sinking fund deposit at $1.25 million, $450,000 for car counters and space sensors at high demand garages, and the final tranche of affordable housing related to the county square funding.
Say what?
Speaking of county square, the parking related fund that we're reporting on tonight does not include the West End garage money. That's accounted for in a separate place, so it is not reflected in any of these numbers. So while the parking fund may show limited capacity for large investments outside of the West End this year, FY24 and beyond has plenty of capacity due to a debt payoff that will occur next year that frees up significant operating cash.
How much will be freed up next year?
Around $2.8 million a year. This forecast is also based on limited growth through system usage and not on rate adjustments.
And the West End parking garage is in reserve, 15 million. What is that number?
Yes.
15 million.
So the zoo has experienced 2 better than expected years, resulting in some fund balance accumulation that can be reinvested in the next budget. On the operations side, there is a proposed addition of 2 staff members, 1 zookeeper and 1 maintenance tech, and a series of investments totaling about $1 million in facilities, exhibits, and amenities, not including some larger scale projects that are being fundraised by the Zoo Foundation. And so there's a whole list of items here where the zoo has accumulated enough cash that they can reinvest in the upkeep of their facilities and expansion of their amenities for their customers. So the forecast for the zoo shows continued gradual reduction of the HTAX subsidy for the zoo. And even with that shows continued net revenue growth that creates capacity for additional investments in improving the customer and animal experience.
And this says no planned rate adjustment, meaning there'll not be an increase in prices for.
It means for planning purposes of building the forecast, I've not built in any assumption of revenue adjustments.
Okay, all right. How will we find that out? Have they made a decision, or do we make the decision?
Yes, so it would be presented to you all ahead of time. The zoo rates are set in the operating budget, and so you'll be notified when there is a approval or disapproval of those.
Now, we raised rates this year. When you say rates, you're talking about entrance rates.
Yes,
And we did that in this fiscal year or the last one?
it may have been last year. I don't.
Okay,
think
it was
we did.
around that time.
I
Okay.
think we did them both years.
So
Oh, I hope so. So we're charging more and the attendance went up.
So in the solid waste fund, the big changes proposed here are a reduction in general fund support and a proposed rate increase to make this operation more self-sufficient. The $1 proposed rate increase will create capacity to finance about $1.2 million in equipment purchases for automated side loaders and leaf vacs to keep the operation in top shape. And the reduction in general fund subsidy will free up funding for a dedicated trash and litter crew to serve neighborhood parks. And so while we are proposing an increase, we are trading that off with an increased investment in keeping neighborhood parks and areas clean with a dedicated litter crew. Looking out into the forecast horizon, shows some smaller potential future rate increases that will keep the fund relatively balanced while general fund support is gradually reduced. So almost to the end of today's presentation. I appreciate y'all's time and attention. There are a number of other funds that we don't discuss today that are part of the city's overall budget. These will be addressed as needed in the final workshop and public hearing. I want to finish off with a few key points and summarize the current proposed budget. This really is a maintenance budget with not a lot of new programs and initiatives, but with a focus on aligning our resources with identified priorities and needs. This budget is about finishing the job, or to use an older term familiar to several council members, getting past the boulders. Funding is included to finish up the SRT connection from downtown to CU ICAR and to fund the city share of the Unity Park Honor Tower, which is the last major component of the park elements. Budget is about delivering on your investments by allocating resources for project management across the organization to get the neighborhood infrastructure bond, Section 108, and public safety campus projects moving forward. Lastly, throughout the budget, we're projecting moderate, sustained growth with an eye towards reserving capacity for future needs or potential economic downturns. So we're about halfway through budget development at this point. We have to advertise for the public hearing by May 8th. So Christina and her team are wrapping up on the detailed numbers for that. And we'll come back to you all on May 23rd with our official recommended budget and finish up with budget adoption on June 13th. Between now and then, we'll finish up business license renewal and may have part of our insurance tax revenues to solidify the general fund. And we should know for sure the status of our second round of ARPA funding. And we'll continue to work through council CIP prioritization to see if there's additional capacity for other projects as needed. On behalf of OMB, I'd like to thank the leadership team and their staff for their hard work in pulling together all these requests, to the manager's office for many hours coordinating and synthesizing all this information, and to my team, particularly Christina Junker, for all of her hard work in pulling all these details together. Thank you all. Answer any questions.
Outstanding.
Very great.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That's outstanding.
I have some questions. But I can wait. Y'all have questions? Okay. I'm going back to where we were 2 months ago at the retreat. And at the retreat, we had a lot of presentations from staff on kind of a bandwidth theme and how we were going to remedy that. We had an acknowledgement that the previous year had been a banner year because of unanticipated ARPA funds, 9 million of a presumed 18 million, right? If we got the first tranche in August, I guess, of 9 million. Unexpectedly, and that helped paint a rosier picture. But you also talked, and we hope to get, we'll know this week if we get the second tranche, okay? You also spoke towards a belt tightening, or maybe I misunderstood, but that our bandwidth, our capacity financially in the next couple of years from tourism was somewhat limited, and we just sort of needed to hang on for a couple of years, that would free up and things would get much freer in a couple of years. So, but now I sense that's changed.
A little. Part of it is more data. So we have, between the retreat and now, we have 3 additional months of revenue collection for us to build our trends on. And so that goes into the revenue side. And then on the expense side, as we've, continue to put together the fine details of where the expenses are, we've been able to, free up a little capacity.
All right. So in that tourism fund account, 2 things have bubbled away from the capital projects list that was presented at the retreat and now into tourism funds as operating budget. So that's a new direction on funding. So when we did the bridges, for example, for the Swamp Rabbit Trail, I think we passed a resolution, right? it was, the scope was 3. We had extraordinarily high costs coming in, and we, chiseled it to do two bridges. And we passed a resolution to support moving forward on those. And then as far as Unity Park goes, every expenditure since I've been on council has been kind of a 1 by 1. So we had an adoption of a budget in March. We approved a bond issue in March of 2020. We've done several additional allocations for undergrounding, maybe stormwater, I'm not sure, but that's certainly undergrounding. But each one has been a standalone vote. So and tell me if I'm misunderstanding this, but what this packet says is we're going to take the 3rd tunnel that wasn't allocated in the Swamp Rabbit Trail Green Line resolution that we did. And we're going to take, you say, the city's share of Unity Park Tower, and I don't really understand what that means, and roll it into the budget.
So
why are we changing direction on how we have funded these 2 items up until now?
I mean, the only commentary I can offer is, we're trying to respond to council priorities. You all have made it as a group clear that those 2 projects are 2 projects that represent priorities for y'all. And as we were building our budget assumptions, it was our judgment to throw those in there and say, if this is not what you want, this is the time to tell us otherwise.
Well, we didn't make it as a group because we never ranked those two. So they got pulled out, and now we have a list that doesn't include those two.
We believe there's a clear consensus, council member, for both of those projects. We think they're priority projects, and there's no time like the present when we're talking about FY23 as far as how to allocate funding and to have that discussion right now. So we feel, unless there's other sentiment, we've included those projects in the FY23 budget.
So what does it mean that 5.5 million is the city's share of Unity Park Tower? And how good do we feel about 2 million for the tunnel? Because I do agree the tunnel is undone business. It was supposed to be a bridge, but it can't be a bridge. I know the people at CUI Car are very appreciative of providing that connectivity because it's very impactful for their economic development of that campus. But I don't understand what you mean by city's share.
So on the Verde underpass, the current engineer's estimate, including design, is 1.8 million. We've added a small contingency to get to the $2 million recommendation. So as comfortable as we can get with anything in this construction environment, that's where we are.
I think we still recognize, though, that we don't want to, by disincentive for Malden and the county to step up to do their part. That's still out there. We don't know what when the county wants to build its extension on the trail and what City of Malden intends to do as well. We certainly believe that's where they're going with this project. And I think in our previous discussion, we kind of wanted to hold back until we find out what's going on with the county and the City of Malden. But I feel reasonably confident they're going to get there. And on the
Well, I know in our previous discussion, when we eliminated that bridge or that connectivity, it was for money. It wasn't because of doubt that the county would pave or do the scoped CUI car. It was pure dollars and cents.
It was coming out of COVID. At the time, we felt like it was important to move that project forward because of its economic development value, the additional 4.5 miles, and we knew it was a priority for
I
council.
agree. Yeah.
We've gone back and looked at it. We think there's a more cost-effective way to address crossing Verde Boulevard. And we've got a high-level estimate right now that gives us some flexibility. We'll have the final design done if council's supportive, and then we'll put it out to bid, and we'll see what the actual cost is. So I think
both of these projects, though, conform to the original plan as adopted by the council and, private fundraising, everything else. I mean, we originally were going to do all the bridges. We only stepped back from the Verde Bridge when we found out the other bridges cost more. And we had to prioritize, and we decided the other two bridges were the first. Lawrence Road was the number one priority, and Haywood Road the second, and arguably this is the third, but now we're in a position to do something about it.
I mean, I just think we've been very good in terms of transparency on both of those projects. And if we now are rolling them into the annual budget, that's a change in direction, in my opinion. Let me ask you this. Again, I don't understand what city share means.
So, we have to have an appropriation for both of those projects. We're in appropriation time right now. So, it's a priority for council. So the funding has been included, at least conceptually at this point, for both of those projects. In response to your question about the Unity Park Honor Tower, in conversations with our current fundraiser, which is Hughes Agency, they feel very good. I've talked with Velda about this numerous times, that she believes that she can raise on a public-private partnership basis 50% or half of the total cost. Our current estimate for that project is $10.8 million. We've added a couple $100,000 to that to get us to 11. Therefore, we've got the city in right now at $5.5 million, with the other $5.5 million being raised by the private sector. And I think Matt has got some visibility on the current status of fundraising. Can you give us an idea of what we currently have pledged toward that at this point?
The current pledges for the tower are about 2.3 million.
And how long will it take to get to 5.5? It's got to be done this year because we're putting it in this year's budget.
So in conversations with the Hughes Agency about this, their agreement will run through the end of November. Is that right? Through the end of November. So I believe there's going to be a major push between now and the end of the year to raise the remaining balance of the funds to match the city's commitment to do that project.
And I'm close enough to that to say the level of confidence in being able to raise 1/2 is very strong. The part of the commitment's already in hand, and the rest look very, very good. I would feel differently if I didn't believe that.
Yeah, I will just say, I just don't support rolling it into the budget at this tenure. I'd rather keep Unity Park funding transparent as we have all along and have allocations done on a case-by-case basis. This is a phase 2 item. Phase 2 includes Unity Park Tower and the wetlands. My understanding is the wetlands were going to be 100% privately funded. When we get to that, I'm sure we'll have discussions and allocate that. But switching gears and putting $5.5 million in an operating budget is a digression from how Unity Park funding has been done up till now. And it's a commitment to an $11 million tower.
Well,
I would love for us to consider a scaled back version. I have no problem with something honoring first responders. I think we're long overdue for that. Just a second. I do understand that the plaza was broken out separately. I asked you about this in the retreat, and it was somewhere around $800,000. And I think we could pump that number up a little bit and do something lovely for far less. But at this point, I'm just, we started Unity Park when I came on council. I think the first briefing I had was the number was around 53 million. And we are now, and that included fundraising, and we are now very close to 70 million, not including the tower. And that's just in 2.5 years. And this is an allocation of 11 million, representing more than 10% of the total project cost. I just think it should be a standalone vote, and rolling it into the budget, I take great exception to.
My response would be that a lot of the funds it's higher because we've raised more private money. The private money, there'll be an announcement in a couple of days of the largest amount of private money yet to be allocated. And it's, of course, a symbol of the tradition of public-private partnerships and the confidence of the community in the project itself. So some of that is driven by that. This is an amount of money that it's a 50-50 split, and I think that's a pretty darn good deal. But the important thing in both of these, both Swamp River Trail as well as the park, these are the plans. Just, anybody who read a document 5 years ago, it's always been there, hadn't changed. And for those who donated private money for the park, it's a very dicey thing when you start to say, oh, by the way, we're not going to do the playground, or by the way, we're not going to do the river restoration, or whatever it may be. People who donated the park did so with confidence that they were contributing to a park in total, and they could see the plan. That's the plan, and that's what we're funding.
Do you have any other questions?
Mayor and Council, you have 2 items to discuss in executive session. One is under 30-4-70A subsection 5 to discuss matters related to proposed location, expansion or provision of services and other economic development incentives. And then under subsection 2 to receive legal advice regarding the redistricting process.
Have a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Favor say aye. Opposed, ayes have it.
Aye.
Where are we doing that? Going ninth floor? Ninth floor. Okay.